Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped.
Myers Vexler here. Today's official response was so vague, it made horoscopes look specific. I've seen fortune cookies with more accountability, but luckily for you, I don't deal in fluff, I deal in facts. Subscribe now because I'm about to walk you through what they say, what they meant, and what they are hoping you will never find out.
Habeas corpus is a legal procedure explicitly mentioned in the Constitution. It allows people to challenge the federal government in court if they've been detained. And one of the president's top aides today, Stephen Miller, confirmed publicly that the White House is exploring this extraordinary step.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article III courts, that's the judicial branch, of jurisdiction over immigration cases. So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article III courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases.
Now, a legal expert that I'm going to talk to in a moment says everything you just heard there from Stephen Miller is not correct. We'll ask Elie Honig why, but I should note that on this premise of this being considered at the White House, as Stephen Miller did confirm there, we're told that President Trump has not explicitly mentioned habeas corpus publicly. We have not actually heard from him say that in front of the cameras, but it is something that he was referencing when we heard from him less than 2 weeks ago as he was asked about what he wants to do when it comes to the nationwide court orders and injunctions against him.
There are ways to mitigate it, and there's some very strong ways. There's one way that's been used by 3 very highly respected presidents, but we hope we don't have to go that route. But there is one way that has been used very successfully by 3 presidents, all highly respected, and hopefully we don't have to go that way, but there are ways of mitigating that.
Now, while it's still unclear tonight if this is something that the administration is actually going to attempt to do, I should note that both the private discussions that we have confirmed here tonight involving the president and also what we're hearing from one of his top and most influential aides publicly does show how this is under serious consideration inside the West Wing, at least. My lead source tonight is the New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman. Maggie, obviously, it's no surprise to anyone that Trump has been frustrated by the courts. I mean, he says it publicly. He was tweeting about it this morning, I think. What do you make, though, of the fact that this is even being considered inside the White House?
So we have seen incredibly aggressive posture from this White House for some time, both from President Trump and Stephen Miller. We know that in the prep before the administration began, Stephen Miller spent years trying to figure out ways to get these plans enacted. Allies of the president figured out how to get lawyers who would help him arrive at a yes as opposed to a no. So I'm not surprised to hear them talking about this. However, as you noted, what Stephen Miller said, a lot of it is not correct. Number one, most of the courts, I think all of the courts, I don't think any court has agreed that the U.S. is under invasion. That is how it has been used in the past to suspend habeas corpus regionally. And when Abraham Lincoln did it, it was actually quite controversial, number one. Number two, this absolutely would be challenged. I don't know how you would, cull it just for migrants. And the border is sealed. So they have really undermined their own case in a lot of ways. I think they do have some running room politically on this, but they may run out of it at some point.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make there about the border, because border crossings are at an all-time low due to President Trump's actions. Correct. And what they've taken, and obviously he ran on this. But if they're arguing that the border is at this point, that crime is so low in the United States, but also that there is an invasion happening, a judge may see that and say, I'm not so sure about that logic.
Right, and a number of judges, including a Trump-appointed judge from his first term, have already said that they are misreading, they're overstretching the statute on the Alien Enemies Act, which is what they have used for these controversial deportations. Some of this might just be fear. It's a way to intimidate the courts, which we have seen Trump and Stephen Miller do a lot of. They've been criticizing judges routinely and repeatedly. It also might be to scare migrants and to get migrants to leave. We know that they are trying to get migrants to be willing to go on their own out of concern that they might be arrested, but I don't know how well this would go if they actually attempted it.
Yeah, and one thing that we've seen change in how the president responds to questions on this is what he instead of just answering for himself, as he's done for years now, as you well know, he keeps turning to the attorneys. And he did so in this ABC interview last month. I just want to remind people about how he answered that question.
The law requires that every single person who is going to be deported gets a hearing first. Do you acknowledge that?
I'll have to ask the lawyers about that. All I can say is this. If you're going to have 21 million people, and if we have to get a lot of them out because they're criminals, we're going to have to act fast. We can't. Do you think we can give 21 million trials? Let's say each trial takes 2 weeks. Is that what you want us to do?
The discussion around suspending habeas corpus by the Trump administration, as revealed by Stephen Miller, is a deeply concerning escalation in the use of executive power. For context, habeas corpus is a foundational legal right enshrined in the U.S. Constitution that allows anyone detained by the government to challenge their detention in court. This right, often called the Great Writ, is one of the most fundamental protections against arbitrary imprisonment and government overreach. Miller's comments suggest that the Trump White House is seriously considering suspending this right, potentially using the justification of an invasion to bypass judicial oversight in immigration cases. He claims that Congress has already passed jurisdiction stripping laws that limit the power of federal courts over immigration, implying that further steps could be taken to remove due process protections. However, this interpretation is both legally dubious and historically problematic. Experts quickly refuted Miller's claims, pointing out that the Constitution explicitly limits the suspension of habeas corpus to times of rebellion or invasion, a threshold that has only been crossed a handful of times in U.S. history during the Civil War, Reconstruction, and World War II. Even then, these suspensions were narrowly focused and highly controversial, often resulting in intense political and legal backlash. The idea of applying such extreme measures to modern immigration enforcement is seen by many as a dangerous overreach. Critics argue that this proposal is less about genuine security concerns and more about intimidating immigrants and pressuring judges, potentially undermining the very foundations of American democracy. With even some conservative voices expressing skepticism, the plan faces significant legal and political hurdles. As the debate unfolds, it serves as a stark reminder of the risks involved when executive power is pushed to its limits, challenging the delicate balance of checks and balances that define the American legal system.
That answer, paired with Stephen Miller arguing that due process doesn't apply to people who are not U.S. citizens last week, stands out to me.
Yeah, and I think you're going to continue to hear that until there is clarity. The Supreme Court doesn't agree with that. The Supreme Court, there have been a number of, it's been very clear that the Supreme Court in the past believes that due process applies to immigrants. They are going to, I think, continue to try to press this on a number of cases, and in a number of ways. They have been actively trying to get cases before the Supreme Court, but what they are doing with some of what they're saying in these various cases in different jurisdictions, they say one thing in one courtroom, they say something different in another, that hurts their credibility once things start reaching the Supreme Court. So again, I know they believe that because they have a conservative supermajority, it will go their way. It has in a number of instances over the last few years, less so now.
And also with Amy Coney Barrett, who has she's gotten a ton of criticism from the MAGA right over how she's ruled and what she's written and said on things.
Right.
I just wonder, though, overall, in terms of how the administration is looking at this, politically speaking as well, it's kind of one of the few areas where people have broken with the president in terms of if he's abiding by the law. There's been the bro podcasters who came out in support of him in the election saying, I'm not sure if I'm totally comfortable with this step that they've taken.
It's not only going to be bro podcasters, if they keep talking about suspending habeas corpus, it will be some Republican senators as well. It is not going to be every single Republican senator, but there will be some who are not going to be comfortable with that, because where's the line? If it is able to be invoked sort of whenever the president wants to claim something's an invasion, then where do you end? And look, on immigration, as you said earlier, they had a big success on something Trump campaigned on, which was sealing the border. They did it almost immediately when they came in. They almost were too quick for their own good, because now they have continued to try to do other things, and they keep stepping on their own success.
Maggie Haberman, thank you for that reporting, as always. Also here tonight, as I mentioned, former Assistant U.S. Attorney and CNN's senior legal analyst, Elie Honig. Elie, you told me earlier when I asked you about Stephen Miller's comments, you thought his description there was wrong. Why?
Dead wrong, crazy, dangerous. Let's start with the Constitution itself. What Stephen Miller says essentially is the Constitution gives us the right to do this, to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, which, by the way, just means the ability to go to court to challenge a detention. He's saying the Constitution tells us we can suspend that. But if you look at the actual Constitution, Article 1 is a restriction. It says we should not withdraw the writ of habeas corpus unless there is a rebellion or an invasion and the public safety is threatened. The Constitution sets the bar incredibly high there, and the history bears it out, which you mentioned before. It's been invoked 4 times, right? Civil War, okay, I think we can understand that, and as Maggie said, it was controversial then. During Reconstruction, in a very narrow way, by the way, only in certain counties in South Carolina to try to counteract the Ku Klux Klan. In 1905, in the Philippines, when we had a hand in governing the Philippines, there was a real rebellion happening in certain regions. And then, what was the fourth?
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, right. And
that was the last time it was used, was 1941.
Exactly, 1944, and only, again, in certain areas of Hawaii. So it's been used very carefully in real invasions, narrowly geographically.
So I think the question is if they're privately looking at this, and it's notable that the president referenced it a few weeks ago, and Stephen Miller basically confirmed it today. I mean, it at least speaks to the seriousness with which they are looking at it.
Yeah, I think it's chilling, frankly, that the president is discussing this behind the scenes. I mean, that is an incredibly dangerous line to cross. Habeas corpus is, and this is the reason I think there's some Republican pushback to this, it is one of the most fundamental rights and protections that we have in this country. The right to go into court and say, I am being wrongfully locked up behind bars. If we are going to pull that right, that is a big deal. That's a red line.
Okay, so let's say they do decide to go forward with it, and they decide the justifications there. It would basically be Congress, and Congress goes along with it. Congress and the White House telling the judicial branch basically that they are the decision makers here.
We're skipping you, courts. Yeah, and that's another important point, by the way. If you look at the history and the way this is set up, the stronger legal belief here is that Congress has to actually suspend the writ of habeas corpus. The president cannot do it himself. In 3 of the 4 times, everyone but the Civil War, it was actually Congress that did it. There's an opinion from years ago where Justice Scalia, so this is not some liberal view, Justice Scalia said it has to come from Congress. And by the way, if you look at where that provision is in the Constitution, it's Article 1. That's what gives Congress its rights. So I think the first argument here is you can't do this yourself, Mr. President. That has to be done by Congress.
And that's, as I was looking this up earlier, that's why Abraham Lincoln was challenged over this, because when
Right.
he invoked it, Congress was not in session
Right,
in
Congress,
that period.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
But I do think, I mean, Maggie mentioned some Republican senators may have an issue with this. We'll see. I mean, is there a chance that they go along with this?
Gosh, I would be shocked if, I mean, to me, this issue transcends politics and ideology. And by the way, I think if they were to try it and it was to end up in the courts, I think the Supreme Court knocks it down. I think it could be 9-0, the Supreme Court knocking it down. That's how extreme.
9-0?
I think so. I think you could even get Thomas and Alito to vote against this, especially if you look at Justice Scalia, what he said years ago. That's someone they look up to.
Yeah. Well, and it's not clear they're going to take this step. It's still extraordinary that they're even considering it. Elie Honig,
Thanks.
thank you for that legal expertise and for texting it to me earlier when I had questions about this.